because there's a whole lot more Seagal insanity to cover. This wasn't even the worst of it. We've just gone over the stuff everybody knows, his movie and media output. Part 2 is where things go really crazy. Well, here's next time. You're not ready for this, and yet here we go anyway. Welcome back to Kung Fail. Larson Halleck here, and evidently you people wanted more Steven Seagal madness. As much as there was in the last video, we've only scratched the surface. I can't really interweave all these together or form a coherent narrative. The man's life is such a spastic clusterfuck, it's kind of impossible to weave together all the disparate threads of insanity. Indeed, we're going to go by broad sections or categories that link some of the antics together, while separating the disparate sections of his life together. Why is the Miscellanea the first section, you might ask? Because as a former member of a professional jazz quartet for about 4 weeks, I like to start slow and build up before a satisfying climax. And obviously, you came here to hear about the sexual assault allegations and or the times that he got clowned by real fighters in public. We will, of course, save the best for last. Even the most cursory research will indicate that Mr. Seagal seems to live in a slightly different, more exciting reality than the one that you or I live in. One in which he feels the need to own bulletproof kimonos. I don't know why he feels this need. Oh wait, yeah I do. Considering that the man lives under paranoid delusions that above the law was based on reality. Of course he would need bulletproof clothing. As for why it's a bulletproof kimono and not, a suit or a sweatshirt or something, well, I think we all know why that is. It's the same reason that Homer Simpson bought a muumuu when he gained 67 pounds. Seagal also collects saddles. Really fancy saddles. I've seen no indication that Mr. Seagal is any kind of equestrian, or that he has in fact ever ridden a horse. Insert your own joke about this guy horseback riding here. I sure hope he's riding Clydesdales. Some of you might be asking, if he's not so successful in films anymore, where is he getting the money to buy these saddles and bulletproof man dresses? Merchandising, of course. Merchandising, where the real money's made. Do you want the frenetic energy of this man? Well, you can't buy his energy drink anymore because it was discontinued in 2015. And that's a shame because you could have consumed lightning bolts with flavors like Asian Experience and Cherry Charge. Reviewers note that it tasted like, and I quote, rancid peaches, cigarettes, and multivitamins. To be fair, I feel that all energy drinks taste like that, so I guess Steven Seagal can be commended for meeting the minimum market standards of energy drinks. But that's not the only Seagal merchandise you can find. Seagal is about as close as you can get to a real-life Krusty the Clown, in that he will slap his giant, beefy face onto anything for money. You don't believe me? Here's Steven Seagal in a celebrity guide to wine. He's sold knives and swords in martial arts seminars, which at least kinda makes sense. But then there's stuff like licensed aromatherapy massage oil, because this guy has the kind of skin you want to have. Now, in a sick way, this does make sense, considering that Steve has been known to use the "I'm a shiatsu master, let me massage you" line as a pickup line. Immediately afterwards, he'll start grabbing at her chest or crotch. But more on that later. He's done advertisements for Australian beer and, Russian sniper rifles. In fact, Mr. Seagal is quite involved with firearms, which seems a bit odd for a Buddhist vegetarian and alleged reincarnated llama, but quite in character for a Walter Mitty type who fabricates his military service. We'll get to both of those in a bit, and I specify Russian rifles specifically because Mr. Seagal has quite the infatuation with the motherland, but again, more on that later. When he's not shilling literally anything, he is shilling himself in yet another persona, that of a mixed martial arts grandmaster. He has somehow managed to talk his way into the walkout entourage of several victorious UFC fighters, like Anderson Silva and Lyoto Machida, both of whom are conveniently Brazilian gentlemen who don't speak English very well. By an astonishing coincidence, a few years back, both Silva and Machida won back-to-back fights with front kicks to the head, and naturally Seagal took credit for this, claiming to have taught them this move in training camps. Not only that, Seagal claims to have invented the move. Allow me to repeat that. He claims to have invented the front kick. You know, that move that's literally the first thing you learn in a karate class. Despite the fact that his charges are not anglophones, I think to an extent they know how BS Steven Seagal is. Here's Mr. Silva mocking his master Which leads me to believe that Steven Seagal wasn't teaching Anderson Silva so much as he just walked into his training camp and hung around for a few hours as the actual fighters stood on, humoring this insane old man while trying to be polite and withholding their laughter. Steven has tried to worm his way into English-speaking fighters' camps, but was told in no uncertain terms to fuck off. Oh, and he also challenged Randy Couture to a fight, but only if it could be held in a place where nobody could watch. Draw your own conclusions. But I suppose MMA was a natural progression for Steven, considering that in his own mind, if nowhere else, he is a valiant military man and defender of America, and I quote, "I have risked my life for the American flag countless times." He has at various points claimed to be a former CIA agent, a former Navy SEAL, and a former mercenary. Naturally, none of this can be proven, nor can it be proven that he ever competed in martial arts competitions, which he has also claimed. It can, however, be proven that Steve co-opted elements of the life of actual CIA agent Bob Strickland and claimed them to be his own life. And of course, we all know that Steve has delusions of grandeur when it came to his artistic abilities. And I quote, "I just read the greatest script ever." Wow, Steve, that sounds pretty cool. Who wrote it? I did. But of course, this is the guy who genuinely thought he was making the world a better place by making On Deadly Ground. But I'm dancing around the point, which is to say that Steven Seagal has, at various points, claimed to have gotten advice from magical telepathic puppies to put out a dojo fire, and that his Japanese students worshipped him as a god, and for the love of God, I'm 100% serious here. You know, the francophone internet sphere occasionally likes to mock Jean-Claude Van Damme, who has admittedly pulled a few boners over the years. He said some weird things. In general, he seems to have a pretty loose command of verbal communication. But the thing is, Van Damme actually has been diagnosed with rapid cycling bipolar disorder. Like, the dude does actually suffer from a mental illness. So he at least has somewhat of an excuse as for why he acts the way he does. As far as I'm aware, Steven Seagal has no excuse for acting the way he does, other than just being an asshole. And no, despite what many people want, being an asshole is not a mental illness. Mr. Van Damme will come up a few times in this video, as he and Steve are both the solid B team of action heroes, plus the two guys genuinely despise each other in real life. And Van Damme has actually, competed in martial arts competition that can be verified, but more on the Seagal-Van Damme feud later. Not only does Seagal feud with Van Damme, he feuds with time and causality themselves. Look at how Steven Seagal has claimed to have been in an all-black blues band in Detroit in the 1950s. Just to clarify, Steven Seagal was born in 1952. But hey, I don't know. Maybe black blues bands were allowing 7-year-old white boys to join. Also worth pointing out is the fact that Steven Seagal has explicitly said that he doesn't keep track of space and time very well. Because when you're a pinnacle god beast like Steven Seagal, you don't need schedules. You live in the moment. Part 2, Religion and Politics. Mr. Seagal is quite involved in politics. I mean, he was, after all, a former Navy SEAL and CIA agent who based above the law on his own involvement with the Iran-Contra affair, or so he claims. At one point, he claimed to be running for governor of Arizona, but that appears to have fallen by the wayside of his new political role, being best buds with Vladimir Putin. Steven feels that Putin is the best world leader working today, and has such faith in him that he has written an open letter to him asking to support immortality and artificial body transplant research. Okay, Vladimir Putin is a martial arts master and a shrewd political manipulator, but I'm pretty sure that he can't single-handedly revolutionize the state of medicine, no matter what the Nazbol people think. Although, dare I say it, if Steven Seagal got a body transplant, he wouldn't need to diet or exercise, now would he? Steve has also been invited to do martial arts seminars in Russia. Naturally, this led to Steve becoming a Russian citizen in 2016, and Seagal's appointment as a goodwill ambassador on behalf of the Russian people. Now, I myself do support improving America's relations with Russia, but I'm not sure that this guy is the one to do it. As for religion, that's a whole nother can of worms. As we discussed, Mr. Seagal is a practicing Buddhist, albeit a somewhat idiosyncratic one. And by idiosyncrasy, I mean that he brings his usual delusions of grandeur to that as well. For starters, he claims to be, and has been proclaimed to be, a Tulku, a reincarnated Lama who denied nirvana to stay on Earth and help others achieve enlightenment. You may know this concept under the name Bodhisattva. This is unusual because most of these people are recognized as children, and not while they're sweaty, middle-aged fat men. This may or may not have something to do with him paying a substantial amount of money as a charitable donation to this monastery, or lamasery rather. Never let it be said that Buddhist monks and lamas cannot be just as greedy, hypocritical, and corrupt as any Western priest. Seagal is also corrupt on a personal level. I'm not going to link it here because I don't want to be demonetized. Immediately after Steven Seagal was proclaimed to be a tulku, he walks into the room talking about how, the universe is in alignment and I feel so enlightened and everything that didn't make sense before now makes sense. Immediately afterwards, his assistant comes up. Hey Steve, your ex-wife just called. She can't bring the kids over this weekend. 180. You tell that fucking cunt! She better bring those kids over here. I'm gonna break her fucking neck! His religious beliefs even bleed into his films. An amusing anecdote from the set of The Glimmer Man has Steven abruptly deciding that karma says he can't kill the bad guy in the end. This is surprising due to the overwhelming brutality of his earlier work. So the scene was shot like this. Steven Seagal shoots Steven Tobolowsky. The squibs explode. Fake blood flies everywhere. His chest caves in. He very clearly dies. And then Steven just 80 yards in the line. Well, I'm sure glad I didn't kill that guy. Steve's Buddhism has also led him to becoming a vegetarian, which is nice, I suppose. I mean, it proves that vegetarianism is not inherently healthier than meat eating, at any rate. But Stevie does love the animals. He was given an award by PETA in 1999. Not that that means much, considering what they've been accused of. And I do have to ask how a guy who constantly walks around in buckskin coats can consider himself to be some kind of environmental crusader. But I do suppose it all ties back into the pseudo-Buddhist reincarnation fal-de-rah. And I quote Master Seagal, "When I walk into a room, some people see a dog, some people see a cow. It's all perception. Some people see a cow." Do I need to say anything? Steven is also a supporter of the Second Amendment and Donald Trump. Well, the Dalai Lama himself has said that self-defense is permissible in the life or death situations, but I still can't help but feel kind of strange about all this. I've been dancing around this for a while, but yeah, Steven Seagal is in general terms a complete dick to basically everybody. I've already discussed how both Saturday Night Live and John Leguizamo don't care for him at all, but it goes a lot deeper than that. How about the time his Lawman show used a tank to break up a cockfighting ring, killing 115 roosters and a dog in the process? Beyond that, Steve really has this overwhelming urge to be an alpha male to the point where he'll randomly kick stuntmen in the dick to test if they're wearing cups. To quote a stuntman on Exit Wounds, "I was training DMX on the soundstage and Seagal showed up and was throwing some guys around on the mats. I waited till he was finished and I walked over to introduce myself. I saw him rearing up, so I started standing sideways just in case he decided to kick me in the jewels. During the conversation, he moved to where I was standing so his hips would be square with mine. So while I was talking with him, I moved back to where I was kind of sideways again. He moved again to square up with me again. I'm thinking, this is not happening. So I switched to where my right foot was forward, turning sideways in the other direction. He had a look in his eyes as he squared up with me yet again. I politely smiled, folded my hands in front of my crotch, and I said I had to get going, and I walked away. It was really weird. Steven Seagal also has had some choice words with regards to other martial arts action heroes, saying, "Can I laugh in your face?" when an interviewer has brought up the likes of Jean-Claude Van Damme or Michael J. White. He has also disparaged Chuck Norris, Bob Wall, Bruce Lee, and the entire sport of full contact karate. Once again, I'd like to point out that Steve has never competed at all. You want more dickishness? The next section has plenty of examples of literal dickishness, but there's plenty of non-sexual assholery too. Steven has been known to randomly put people in arm bars or wrist locks. In fact, he broke Sean Connery's wrist on the set of Never Say Never Again, and he put Dan Inosanto in a wrist lock as well on the set of Out for Justice. Naturally, this all ties in with his massive ego, and as I mentioned in the last video, he is contractually obligated to not take damage in his films. But let's get to the first of the two sections you people really want. Many reports and direct quotes show that Mr. Seagal is under the impression that he's some kind of sex symbol. While he may have looked halfway decent in his prime, Steven Seagal is not in his prime anymore, but that doesn't stop him from trying to get some at all costs. I should point out that according to his latest accuser, Caden Wynn, a former personal assistant to Seagal, Steve has a unique physiological reaction to sexual arousal. Unique physiological reaction. Excuse me for a second, I'm gonna go vomit. Just, what? The court documents don't go into detail about what this reaction is, but perhaps my imagination is too vivid, but my mind instantly leaps to a flood of revolting possibilities. Does Steven's penis spontaneously start helicoptering? Do his nipples stand turgid and erect? Does he start spontaneously exuding grease from all his pores? Or maybe all three? Anyway, I thought way too much about Steven Seagal's O-face for the rest of my life, so I'll just mention that he apparently chased after this woman with a gun. As mentioned previously, the Seagal move is to claim he's a shiatsu massage expert, and then start grabbing at their naughty bits. You can ask Jamie Presley about that. Or how about Jenny McCarthy, who was told in no uncertain terms to take off her dress as they sat on Steve's giant leather casting couch? Curiously, it is worth pointing out that while casting Out for Justice, Steven apparently only cast the woman that stood her ground and got him to stop molesting her. When I was finally able to get him to stop, he told me I had the part, said one actress. But there are dozens of claims against him, ranging from the typical casting couch thing to outright rape to owning sex slaves and human trafficking. He apparently had 2 young Russian ladies as paid members of his staff who were on call for his sexual needs 24/7. Also, he has a coterie of men who are there to basically vouch for him no matter what happens. Perhaps he was telling the truth about being worshipped. And of course, when all else fails, just do the Weinstein move of unzipping your pants, if Portia de Rossi is to be believed. Many of these accusations are still processing in court. Some of them have been settled out of court. And let's end on a positive note. For a guy who portrays himself as the toughest man on earth, he has an astoundingly bad record of actually winning fights. It is simultaneously sad and hilarious. Remember what I said about JCVD? About how Seagal said he was a fake and etc.? As I've said previously, for all of his own insanity, his past 10,000 a week cocaine addiction, and rampant marital infidelity, Van Damme is an actual, legitimate, competitive martial artist. So naturally, Van Damme was not happy about Seagal saying he was a fraud, and things came to a head in 1997. Quote Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, you know, Van Damme was there with Seagal, Willis, Schwarzenegger, Shaquille O'Neal,
I'm gonna stop doing this. Okay, Van Damme was tired of Seagal saying he could kick his ass, and he went right up to him and offered him the chance to step outside, so he could wipe the floor with him, or rather the backyard. Seagal made some excuse and left. He was going to some Ocean Drive nightclub in Miami. Van Damme was enraged. He tracked him down and he again offered him to fight, and again Seagal pulled a Houdini. End quote. After Seagal disparaged Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, and the entire sport of full contact karate in the pages of Black Belt magazine, decorated karateka and friend of both Norris and Lee, Robert Wall, decided to do something about all this. He assembled The Dirty Dozen, not the movie, of course, but 12 highly decorated karatekas, to publish editorials countering Seagal's allegations, and also say that any one of them would fight Seagal anytime, anywhere. These were all legitimate karate champions like Bill Wallace, Michael Stone, Ben Urquidez, and more. Steve backed down from all of them too. He also backed down from Kung Fu fighter and early mixed martial arts fighter Jason DeLucia, who actually staked out Seagal's house and waiting for him to come out, to no avail. But maybe it's for the best that Steve backed down, because when he does try to fight, it doesn't go so well. Just ask Gene LaBelle, who choked Steven Seagal into not only unconsciousness, but spontaneous defecation. There are many accounts of this story, but I will give you a staid and neutral version of it. On the set of Out for Justice, Steven Seagal claimed that nobody could choke him out. The stunt coordinator of that film was 10th degree judo black belt Gene LaBelle, who naturally wanted to take Steven up on this offer. So they agreed to test out this claim. They got ready, did all their preparations, and they began to roll. Eventually, Gene LaBelle got him into a choke, a rear naked choke. Steve let loose his secret anti-choking technique, which is to say he punched Gene in the groin. Gene withstood the pain and held the choke, and Steven went out unconscious. And then he proceeded to soil himself. Steve also picked a fight with professional wrestler Curt Hennig, doing the same move that he did to Sean Connery and Dan Inosanto, putting him in wrist locks surreptitiously. However, Hennig came up with an ingenious solution to this problem. Steve and him went to shake hands. Steve decided to put him in a wrist lock just to be a dick. Curt squeezes his hand as hard as he could, and Steve falls to his knees in pain. I guess the whole Mr. Perfect thing wasn't just a gimmick. Coincidentally, Curt Hennig also enjoyed Colombian nose candy, so much so that it killed him in 2003. So considering Hennig and Van Damme, Seagal is 0 for 2 against crackheads. But I don't want to imply that Steven Seagal only makes an ass of himself in fighting contexts. No, in non-fighting contexts as well, he also makes a fool of himself. Let's hear about the time that he went scuba diving. And I quote Gary Goldman of Spy Magazine, "Late in 1988, a former soldier of fortune and current treasure hunter named Randy Widner invited Seagal, myself, and another man to go scuba diving off the coast of Barbados. At that time, Seagal had been telling me that he had been a Navy SEAL. Judging from his lack of familiarity with scuba gear, evidently this was one frogman who did not take well to the water. The surf that day was unbelievable, really tough. Seagal started screaming and panicking, and he was sure he was going to die. We had to pull him up out of the water by his hair." Far from being a Navy SEAL, I am convinced that if you were to give Steven Seagal a map and a compass and tell him that a restaurant was 5 miles away, he would die of starvation. Alright, I think eventually I'm meandering to a stop about this. Now, there are other Seagal stories that I could have gone over. There's a pretty funny one Tom Arnold likes to tell about how Steven Seagal walked through a fake door and right off a dock. But, we've been going on for close to half an hour about this, and if I were to go through every insane Seagal story, I'd be here all week. In the tradition of his movie titles, Steven Seagal is his own unique beast. A bully, a coward, a sexual predator, a paranoiac, a clod with delusions of grandeur, and a man who lives in a far more fascinating reality than any of us. He is an utterly entrancing man, and I pray that he never changes. I'm Larson Halleck. Keep on training. And now, a word from our sponsors. Hello, are you a fan of Larson Halleck and the Barbaric Gentleman? Of course you are, otherwise you wouldn't be watching. Would you like to help the channel grow? Would you like to help me out? If so, here's how you can. You can go to patreon.com/LarsonHalleck and join the ranks of these illustrious heroes. You can also go to www.paypal.me/LarsonHalleck to also donate some money. You can also buy my book. The Patreon, the PayPal, and the link to my book are all found in the video description. You can also follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. I no longer advertise my Gab because Gab sucks. Otherwise, enjoy, keep watching the videos, and spread the word.